In today's video, I will be giving you guys 3 reasons why the Carolina Panthers are actually underrated heading into 2025. Subscribe and like the video if you do go on to enjoy. Let's hop into it. And we are going to begin with my very first reason why the Panthers are underrated, and that is the fact that the offensive talent has been pretty upgraded. Now, in this section, I'm not going to talk about Bryce Young because I want to kind of save that towards the back end of the video. For now, I want to talk about the supporting cast that is around Bryce Young. Let's start off with the running back room. This is actually a pretty deep running back room that unfortunately has the injury to Jonathan Brooks, which as a Texas Longhorns fan, I think it's really unfortunate. He's such a talented player. Hopefully he can return sometime either late this year or sometime next year. Regardless though, Chuba Hubbard is one of the better starting running backs in the NFL. They definitely have a solid running back too, and of course Rico Dowdle, who by the way had 1,000 rushing yards for Dallas last year. Trevor Etienne might also play a bit of a role this year or maybe in future years. All in all, I think this is an excellent running back room that has some young pieces to look forward to down the road and some dudes right now who can actually play at a fairly high level. Then there's the receiving core, which has been a unit that has kind of been overhauled in a lot of ways since Bryce Young has been the starting quarterback. Of course, Adam Thielen remains there. He's probably going to be your quote-unquote wide receiver 2 for the upcoming season, but you also pair him up next to first-round pick Ted McMillan and 2024 first-round pick in Xavier Legette. So now you're adding in 2 new receivers to play next to Bryce Young, and I think both could very well honestly be starting caliber guys. Legette and Ted are both big body receivers, Legette being a little bit more of a physical styled receiver. He's a bit stronger, a bit bulkier. Ted is a bit taller, a bit lengthier, and maybe a little bit lankier, but they can all kind of do different things. Thielen will primarily probably work in the slot. Legette will probably be a bit more of your deep threat. And you're going to see Ted kind of be that intermediate to, sometimes downfield threat that can make a lot of big plays. He's a really solid athlete. For somebody his size, you think he's Andre Johnson or Julio Jones, when in actuality, he's more like of a possession guy. He's more of a speedster guy. He can win the 50-50 balls, like an A.J. Brown is known for. He can do that, but that's not really like his go-to game. He's somebody who can play in a lot of different roles, play a lot of different routes, and I just think he's a really solid fit with Bryce Young in general. So I like this little receiving core you have building here, not to mention Jalen Coker, who's also there, will probably get a significant play time this year. You have Hunter Renfrow. We'll see if he can get involved. I've heard a lot of good things about Jimmy Horn Jr., so we'll see about that. Then in the tight end room, of course, Tommy Tremble returns. You have Jatavion Sanders, who will develop into becoming a bit more of a bigger threat this upcoming year. And you also look at the offensive line, and the offensive line is pretty darn good too. I don't think there's really a big hole in this unit. If there was, maybe it's like a center, but in general, I think you feel pretty good about the offensive line. You pair all this offensive talent now with a third-year quarterback to go along with a second-year head coach. There's more continuity with this offense. There should be better chemistry with this offense. There's more dynamic weapons within this offense. You look back at Bryce Young's rookie year, there was nothing really of substance to work with. It was, I think Jonathan Mingo was drafted that year. You had Adam Thielen. Outside of that, you were relying on, I think DJ Chark was the guy. Don't quote me on that. I think it was somebody like him though. And it was just a bad receiving core. Your tight end room was also not very good. Your offensive line was not good. So Bryce stepped in there, and there was nothing to work with. No dynamic weapons, no really reliable guy outside of Adam Thielen, and that offensive line was so bad that Bryce had a brutal rookie season. I don't think he probably should have played that year. I think he should have sat the entire season. They should have, brought in a veteran quarterback to be the starting quarterback to let Bryce develop. But it's one of those things where nowadays, when you are the first overall pick, the expectation is for you to go out there and play. That's a little side tangent. Then in 2024, they improved the offense quite significantly in a lot of different ways. 2 big additions to the interior of the offensive line. Ike Ekwonu got even better last year. So, you saw the offensive line take a big step forward. Then the receiving core, you added in an Xavier Legette, you added in a Jalen Coker, and those guys started to fill out a little role for themselves. And then as the season progressed, and then Bryce got better and better and better, you started to notice, Jatavion Sanders improving. Chuba Hubbard really had a great year last year. And you saw a variety of other guys kind of step up. Not to say the offense was good at all last year, because it was frankly not very good. But you saw the glimpse late into last year of what this offense could look like when it's a 100% unit, when it's at a full go. You now look at it, you had a backup running back in Rico Dowdle, who I think is very quality. You get another year of development from guys like Legette, JT Sanders. You get now a Ted McMillan in this offense. There's more variety, there's more depth, there's better playmakers in general. And, frankly, I think this is a really solid offense for a lot of quarterbacks to go out there with. I think if you were to put a lot of quarterbacks in this system, I'm talking like a Dak Prescott, a Jared Goff, a Stroud, one of those type of style of quarterbacks, they could work with these weapons. That 2023 Panthers offense, there was no quarterback that really could seriously work with these weapons. Even the Mahomes, the Allens, and the Lamars of the world would have struggled in some ways in this offense. Now, they would have been better than how Bryce was in his rookie year, but they still would have struggled. Now you put those quarterbacks with this offense, and they can get the job done. So I like what they're building on the offensive end. I also just believe they have a great head coach in Dave Canales, who I was a big fan of when they hired him. I thought last year you saw the early season struggles, and he was far from perfect. But I felt like as the year went on, primarily around the time they benched Bryce in favor of Andy Dalton, you started to see Canales get a bit more comfortable, a bit more confident. And by the end of the year, I don't want to over exaggerate how good they were at the end of the season, but they were giving Kansas City a run for their money. They held Philadelphia in check for the most part. The Dallas game wasn't pretty, and they had a couple other games that weren't great, but they were competitive at the back end of last year. After this New Orleans game, when Bryce was reinserted back into the lineup after the Denver game, you basically held a lot of these teams in check. Again, the Dallas game wasn't pretty. Now there was the Tampa Bay game, but you had Tampa Bay in overtime. 3-point loss to Kansas City, 6-point loss to the Super Bowl champions, an overtime win versus Atlanta. I don't want to overthink what happened last year and make it like it's the biggest deal in the world, but that's an important big step in the right direction. And then you add on to all that this offseason with even more offensive depth and variety. And I look at this offense and I think it can actually be an improved unit. I think the biggest reason why Carolina was not more competitive early into last year was because the defense sucked, but the offense was really not that great either. But once the offense kind of got going late in the season, you started to see the defense play a little bit more competitive, a little bit better, far from perfect. But, you hold a Saquon Barkley team to 22 points. You keep the Chiefs within a competitive game. You keep the Buccaneers, who had a potent offense, in a competitive game. So I think if this offense can really take a big step forward, then it'll help out the entirety of this team, which then brings me to my second reason as to why I actually think the Carolina Panthers are a bit underrated. And that second reason is there have been some slight defensive improvements. Now, I say slight, and I want to put an emphasis on slight. I do not think they overhauled the defense by no means. I don't think they added in any complete difference makers from what they had last year. But I think there was one major addition that came not necessarily through free agency, neither the draft, but through the injuries. Derek Brown returning is going to be a significant upgrade for this team. Once he went out with injuries, that defense that was already not good got even worse. And so now you return Derek Brown into the lineup. You also add in a Nick Scorin, a Princey Umanmielen inside the draft. You also add in a Trevon Moehrig, a Tershawn Horton, a Bobby Brown, et cetera, through free agency. And now you look at this defense and there's a nice mixture of some young youth talent that's going to develop paired alongside some veterans and some guys who have been there and done that. Again, I do not want to over-exaggerate here. I do not think this Panthers defense is going to be a top 15 unit. I think it would be nice to see them go from the worst unit to the 25th worst unit or something along those lines. I want to see this defense take a bit of a step forward. Can they get, into that top 22 defense conversation? And if they can do so, pair that up with an offense that goes from being, towards the back end to maybe league average, this team will take a big step forward from a team that won 5 games in 2024 to maybe 8, 9, maybe 7 if you want to go on the low end, which is a significant upgrade from where they were last year. I know people might see the title and say, oh, they're going to make the playoffs. No, the expectation is not to make the playoffs. The expectation is to win a few more games and then reach the playoffs in a few more years. And a big reason why I think they can get to 8 or 9 wins, the offensive improvements like I talked about in the first reason, and then these defensive improvements. Let's break it down like I talked about with the offense, starting off with the defensive line. This team typically runs a bit more of a 3-4 style, so you do have some outside linebacker play. But in the interior, Derek Brown, Bobby Brown III, Tershawn Horton, who was, I guess, one of their bigger ticket free agents. They thought they had Milton Williams at one point, at least if my recollection of memory is correct. I think they thought they had Milton. He ended up going to New England. And honestly, truth be told, Even though I thought the Tershawn Horton contract was also pretty big, I kind of think the Milton Williams contract was a little bit ridiculous. I would not have been willing to pay him that much money. He's like the second highest paid defensive tackle in the league and has a career high sacks of like 8 or something like that, or maybe even less than that. I think it was 5 or something like that. So yeah, I'm honestly okay with Carolina passing on that, even though I think Milton's a good player. That was just kind of a ridiculous price tag. Regardless, they still paid Tershawn a lot of money, who's also a bit of an unproven player. The Panthers have the money, and maybe it could be a risky little bet they're willing to take. It could end up being pretty good because Brown could be a bit more of a run stuffer. I guess both Browns could. And then Horton could be a bit more of like a pass rush ace up the middle. We'll see if it can work out for them. And then off the edge, DJ Wanham had a nice couple games last year. I think he had like 4 sacks last year, and towards the back end of the year, he was kind of starting to play a little bit better. So hopefully he can kind of develop to be a bit more of that disruptive pass rusher, because that's what this team really could use off the edge. And then besides them in the draft, Nick Scorin, who I thought was a borderline first round talent. They take him in the second round. Great value, by the way. Not sure if he's ever going to be a 10 plus sack a season guy, but I think, having him be a part of your rotation for several years to come, playing him alongside DJ Wanham, I think he has the potential. Well-sized, well-built, has some variety to his pass rush move. He's still very young and a little bit raw, so there's a lot to like with him. And then from Princely, it's kind of the same conversation. Big dude, has some upside factor to him. If they can develop these guys correctly alongside a DJ Wanham, I think that could be a nice little trio of pass rushers. I still think it's missing, and this is going to be kind of crazy to say, it's missing the Nick Bosa or the Micah Parsons or the Myles Garretts of the world. I think if you can find a top 10 level pass rusher and then pair him with the Wanham, with the Scorin, and with the Princely, assuming Scorin or Princely don't become that, this unit could actually be really, really solid, assuming there is some development. Again, I do think they're going to be missing a little bit of some pass rush, but I think they have at least more options than what they had last year. I also think they'll just be better against the run because of Derek Brown right then and there. And then in the linebacking room, you have Christian Roseboom, who you brought in, Trevin Wallace, who was I think a day 2 pick or early day 3 pick in 2024. Didn't love the value then. Didn't really play that great last year. We'll see if he can play a big time role for this team this upcoming season, because clearly they saw something in him. If he can just be good at like stuffing the run or good against the pass, then I guess the pick could end up being worth it, but we'll wait and see. For now, I think linebacker is a position they should look to upgrade here soon alongside a potential pass rusher. In the secondary, you did hand out a big contract to J.C. Horn, who, when healthy, is really good, but has really struggled with injuries throughout his career. It is a bit of a risky deal, but if you feel confident he can get the task done by staying healthy, then I guess it's worthwhile. You pair that up with a Shaw Smith-Wade who could play in the nickel, a Mike Jackson who could play as the other outside corner. Not like in love with their secondary. I think there's some talent here, especially with the Shaw Smith-Wade. I think they have their go-to guy in J.C. Horn, who can be your lockdown cornerback 1 if he can stay healthy. I don't love the depth here, and I think there's more to wants in terms of other guys on the outside. But for now, I do think it's a step in the right direction. In the safety room, I do like the addition of Trayvon Moehrig. I think he's a very underrated player that can play both free safety and strong safety. Pair him up next to a Nick Scott. You also drafted a Lathan Ransom. You also have Damani Richardson. We'll see how that unit all kind of works out and who gets the most snaps out of the 4. I think Trayvon will probably be the guy, but there's other guys here too. I like the safety room. I think there's some depth here. There's some talent. We'll see if they can develop and really find their duo of the future. So, kind of moral of the story. There's still stuff that needs to get done. It's not a finished unit, but there's some pieces here to already kind of work with and to kind of like with this defense. Which brings me to my third and final reason why I think the Carolina Panthers are a little bit underrated, and that is the fact that this is a make or break year for Bryce Young. Former first overall pick 2 years into his career, and so far, it hasn't been great. Of course, late last year, he had that run that gives you a lot of confidence going into this upcoming season. But prior to that, rookie year, where the talent was terrible around him, he was not good. And even when you are a bad team with nothing really good around you, you still want to see that quarterback you drafted first overall make some plays, right? Do something special. You look at Caleb Williams last year, who was in a pretty bad situation there in Chicago. Head coach gets fired, shitty offensive line, receivers who are just not a good fit with one another. And even then, Caleb still made enough plays and made enough splashy moments to have you feeling pretty good about your first overall pick. For Bryce in that first year, it just wasn't really the case. And, again, I don't want to put a lot of the blame on him, but he also just never seemed to really make any big time plays. And then last year, the start of the year was abysmal for him. He finally comes in, gains some confidence, plays with a bit of swag, and it started to look pretty good towards the back end of last year. So as we head into this upcoming season, I do feel good about Bryce Young. I don't feel great because clearly we're talking about like a 7 or 8 game sample, but that sample late into the year and how just confident he looked as the season progressed makes me feel pretty good. I think this is the most talented team that's been around him. Again, it's far from a great team, but it's talented enough. I think this is the year where if this team wants to be considered a future playoff contender, this is the time and this is the year for Bryce Young to take that big step. I think Bryce Young and his progression is the storyline of the entire season for the Carolina Panthers. If Bryce Young does not have a good year, this team is going to have to take a pivot this upcoming offseason. If Bryce goes out there and is below average, I think this team has to pivot, and I think they have to pivot fast because there's a lot of other teams that are going to be looking for quarterbacks next year, and it's a pretty talented quarterback class. So if you are Carolina, I don't think you can just continue to do this mission of Bryce Young has to work, we have to make it work. I think you have to be flexible. I know you spend a crap ton to get Bryce Young, and so far it hasn't really worked out, and I know you want it to work out, but if Bryce does not pan out for you, you're going to have to pivot, and you're going to have to pivot fast. Of course, if Bryce Young does work out, then cool. We can give him his extension by the end of this year or next year. He could be our franchise guy for hopefully the next 10, 15 years. Again, as I've talked about throughout the video, the offense has been improved. You add in a Ted McMillan, more continuity, more chemistry, more growth, more experience for Bryce Young. And now he has a defense that can, keep them in games occasionally. There will be times where teams will score 40, 35 plus points against Carolina, and Bryce can't really do anything about it. It's par for the course for a rebuilding team that has a very, very bad defense. It's just going to happen. But what you really want to see is just, can this offense stay competitive? Can they stay in games? Because Bryce Young is not necessarily carrying, but doing his job and getting this team to score points and, have possessions where they hold the ball long. Those all need to be answered by Bryce Young this upcoming season. And it's part of the reason why I do think this team is underrated, because I think there's a lot of people that don't really know how to feel about Bryce Young. I think a lot of people aren't really confident in him. And if they are, it's like a pessimistic confidence where it's like, yeah, it could work out, but I don't know. For myself, I think it is going to happen where Bryce Young has at least an above average season. And in terms of like numbers I'm expecting from Bryce, I think for the team that is surrounding him with the coaching staff that he's had, with the experience he now has, I think a reasonable number for him to get to would be, I don't know, like 3,400 plus yards, 20 plus touchdowns and less than 10 picks, something along those lines. Doesn't necessarily have to be that. If the team's success is there and they're primarily a rushing team and Bryce's numbers are affected by that, then that's fine. But I just want to see more from Bryce. I want to see him improve. I want to see a big jump this upcoming season because I do think the Panthers season basically rides on the back of Bryce Young. If Bryce Young's good, this Panthers team could be underrated. If Bryce Young sucks, this Panthers team's probably going to be drafted top 5 overall in 2026. So to end the video off, I just want to talk about some good and some bad about this Panthers team. Good, I think the offense is improved. I think there's more chemistry. I think there's more continuity. There's some talent to work with on defense now. Bad, I still think you need an edge rusher. I still think you need maybe a linebacker, some more help in the secondary. And I think there's a massive question mark at quarterback. So we'll see, kind of how this all pans out. Who can, transform that defense? Can Bryce Young get the task done? Can this team win 8 or 9 games next year and really feel confident about 2026 and so on and so forth? So it's all going to be very interesting, but you let me know in the comment section below, how many wins are the Carolina Panthers going to get in 2025? And if you enjoyed, hit the like and subscribe button. Love you guys. Peace.